First of all, it's an honor to have a flower-side chat with Peter. And I mean, not only he understands the industry, he is an expert on this industry. He's a successful entrepreneur. He started this business in 1991, and he is a very successful author. So in many ways, there is a multi-dimensional element to Peter, and I can't resist but to ask him, as he looks at, I mean, we read all these news about layoff, new technology, all that is happening. In the context of that, Peter, how do you see the market evolving in terms of service consumption? Yeah. What are the trends, big trends that you're seeing?
We know we're thinking about IT and BPS here. So overall, we've seen a deceleration, particularly in the IT space, but we see a very high floor to demand. So it's come down a little bit. BPS actually seems to be accelerating. I think if you kind of think behind that, why is that? I think a number of things. I think we've hit a stage of pragmatism. So the last few years have been one about digital transformation. We've been waving our arms around about we can change the world. I think it's changing, but I think if you think about where we are right now, we're kind of 10, 15 years in, most firms are into 10, 15 years into a digital transformation. And I think they're ready to really start to be more pragmatic and see results. And I see that comes across a lot, which is part of the high demand. I mean, there's always the, are we actually hitting a soft landing, a landing at all? Is it accelerating? All those other issues. We were watching these factors back in May of last year, and we came to the conclusion that as we were looking at talking to customers, looking at the analytics, there was going to be a high floor, and that's what it looks like. So I think it's a good time to be, still a good time to be in services, and it's a great time to be in the BPS side of the world.
Yeah, I can't complain at all. In fact, I have done about 37 years in the industry, and one of the things which I have seen many a times, the word cost comes back in some shape and form, that I want to see how can I optimize my cost. Maybe the whole offshore industry's birth was built around Y2K and cost. But now I'm beginning to see a trend of cost again, but with a difference. The plain vanilla cost is being asked of, but at the same time, they are saying, I want to do it in a transformative way. I don't want to slow down my transformation because I need to compete in a new world as well. So help me transform and help me reduce the cost faster than what we have done before because of the economic climate. And I guess that brings a slightly different approach, which we are trying to do, but I'm not here to do a commercial on how we sell and what we sell. But that's the trend. Are you seeing a similar trend in the marketplace?
I mean, so labor arbitrage is a unit cost reduction.
That's right.
And what we're talking about is a cost to serve reduction.
That's right.
And so when you get to cost to serve, you're thinking about the automation, the technology. It's really easy to see this happening in some of the industry verticals. You were mentioning earlier payments, right, or your banking. That it's more advanced, or it's quite advanced in some of those areas. Life sciences, you can take any industry, you can see this coming. So it's that combination of where we actually, back to my original point, we're at a point now where almost every firm has been investing, particularly in digital, right? And where it's landing them is with this appetite for pragmatic benefit. You'll hear the term OKR coming up, right? Objectives and key results, right? And anytime you hear that, it's a real signal that they're moving down that path of trying to address that cost to serve, right? We've come up with a term to just describe that. We call it platform operations. They're effectively evolving towards a platform and a platform operations model where the operations of the platform are getting closer to closer and easier to understand as one thing rather than two. But that's what we see happening, and yeah, you can pull the labor arbitrage lever and you can take new estates to India or the Philippines or wherever you choose to take the low-cost location, but you get even better results by moving into this platform operations model.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there are, you have the so-called cost center optimization if you go to an enterprise. And then you have the profit centers. And in many cases, what we are experiencing is customers are saying that, hey, help me reduce cost, but could you help us accelerate my revenue as well? Yeah. What can you do for us to accelerate my revenue? Do you have solutions which reduces my cost per revenue dollar and at the same time helps me accelerate the revenue dollar? We saw it more from born digital clients to begin with, because the way they started interacting with us was, I'm not just looking at your ability to do it in a cost-effective fashion. I'm interested in reaching out to this market faster because we believe the window is short. What value can you bring to accelerate my access to the market and making it successful? So the word acceleration, we started at least experiencing in working with these born digital clients. Any thoughts on how that cross-pollination is happening between what happens in born digital clients and so-called not born digital clients?
The time to impact is, for at least a subset of the market, become very important, particularly when you're talking about revenue, right? So if you're thinking about the traditional labor arbitrage, actually you've got 18 months to implement. You're going to, but now I've got these OKRs, or these objectives and results, and often their revenue and other issues, right? So it's the time to get there, and the fact that will continually be changing. We talked earlier about these cycles of change, right? I know this is theoretical, but most of our companies are built around processes, right? And processes are built for stability. We optimize them, we infuse them with technology, but we keep them. As we move into a platform world, we build them to continuously change, which disrupts the process orientation. So your clients are experiencing this, right? And they're saying, okay, well, how do I evolve faster? How do I get better results? How do I respond more agilely to the market? How do I use that to compete, but also time to have a lower cost to serve, right? Often, particularly as you move into these infusions of technology and operations, your cost to serve, you may actually be substituting, in many instances, higher cost components. Technology, you're often moving your talent pool from uplifting the talent pool. As more you invest in automation, the more you invest in platform, the more capable the talent has to be. That's a huge problem. How do you change at that pace, right? How do you change your operations at that pace? How do you operate the tech stack at that pace? Easy for you to say. So yes, this is what we see happening in the marketplace. Clearly, industries and clients are at different stages of that, but it feels like that's where the digital technology wants to take us.
Right. So in fact, when you mentioned about where do you play, we were in discussion with one of the firms which is in life sciences, and their focus is, how do I take from lab to life? The entire cycle. There was no discussion of finance and admin or order processing. The whole focus was, how do I take and compress the time from lab to life? And the value proposition that you build around it is not just focused on cost angle, not just focused on offshoring, which, as you rightly said, I like the way you said, how far do you want to push the offshoring angle? It was more about what kind of accelerators you can bring in, what kind of IP can you bring in, what kind of transformation can you bring in? And firms have to think about governance and change management. So it was a lot more complex than the traditional world BPO, which comes to anybody's mind. But it is these kind of opportunities which we are experiencing and which are kind of challenging us to a higher level of performance. Are you seeing that across the board in other verticals?
Well, actually, we're seeing it almost everywhere. Often, when we have these conversations, often when you start the conversation, I mean, this term platform operations, it's our term. I don't know that it's been well syndicated in the industry. But once you start describing it, whether it's a CEO or head of a function, or they're like, yes, and they start to recognize that's the direction they want to head, and getting frustrated by the constraints that are stopping them getting there. You mentioned something. Along with this, you start to change your language and your metrics. You gave me an example there of, okay, well, we want to get to this end-to-end metric. Well, we could think of it as a breakthrough metric, but often they're termed as OKRs, right? That allow that metric then allows you align your organization and your tech stack much more closely, right? And the opportunity, one of the implications of that is because that is a journey, not a destination, it's very hard for most organizations to get there on their own. So you've got a lot of change, and that change will continue in perpetuity. And so it does change how they think about alliances, partnerships, how they architect that. And I think we're entering into that era, and we're seeing that happening. And it sounds like it's showing up in the Cognizant book of business. You have a different language. You start to architect things differently, both in operations and tech stack. You start to plan differently. You start to fund it differently. You start to think about persistent relationships rather than best-of-breed relationships. Well, you have both. You have a core persistent relationship, typically with one or two strategic vendors, and then you have a whole bunch of best-of-breed vendors that do specific projects that hang around it. I think we're looking at the way I look at it is we've entered into this next stage of maturity, and we're actually getting to some of the promises we made 10 years ago around digital transformation. We're actually getting to some of those benefits.
Yeah, so Peter, I want to get your perspective on two topics. One is the world of BPO and tech has remained as if they are parallel worlds which will never converge. And the discussion, it's converging has happened for the last 15 years. And yet it remains as a kind of a maybe slightly converging, but not exactly together. I want to tee off that discussion. Your perspective, is it converging? Should people start thinking about convergence, or should service providers react like that? Should customers start thinking of their structure in the context of tech and BPO converging? Your views?
Well, I think there are different markets. There's a tech market and there's a BPS market. Right? Perhaps it's easier to think about what's happening in the BPS market. Right? We're infusing a ton of technology into it. Right? And that's being laid down with or without the service provider, but it's in the context of that process solution. Right? So maybe the way to think about that is BPS is having more and more technology in it. Now, does that mean that the tech market will all become BPS? Well, probably not. Okay, there's a long journey associated with that. But one of the reasons we're now seeing the BPS market starting to outgrow or accelerate past the IT market is because there's pragmatism. Where do I get my savings? Right? Well, I've been madly trying to modernize my tech stack for the last 2 years, right? Now I need to get savings. I still have a perspective. I need to infuse technology, whether it's automation or platform or whatever version of that, starts with cloud normally. But, how do I get results out of that? Well, you go get it from your BPS, because that's where I can get business results and I can lower my cost to serve, right? And I can move at the pace I need to move at, right? So they're separate markets, huge infusion of technology coming into BPS. And I think we're going to start looking at them together. I think it's a mistake to think within the BPS space you have a technology problem and an operations problem. I think you've got one problem, and it's easier to solve it together than it is to solve it independently.
Yeah, I mean, I want to share with you my first experience with BPO, 1999, when HP wanted to set up the finance offshore in there was a competition between Barcelona and India, and I was India head for HP. I was canvassing for that to come to India. And the tech at that time was trying to solve the last mile lease circuit in India. That was the tech problem, right? I had to meet the state chief minister to get that last mile. Now, when we look at the kind of business that we are focused on, it's an important tech-infused process is the best way I would describe it. So it's not a standalone, it's not tech sitting outside. It's very much embedded in the process. And customers are wanting to see how it works. And there is the other side, which I said I'll ask you the second question, was this question. I joined Cognizant 3.5 years ago. I had a perception of what BPO is. And then I came here, we started doing business with Born Digital clients. And training an autonomous car, that process, as a business process, I never thought of it as a business process. Then the whole geospatial solution, whether we call it maps, whichever maps you are using, so people think about driving the GPS and driving the car or whatever. That's maps on top of the surface. Now the world is going in subterranean mapping. And then very soon you will see drones delivering boxes. It's in a limited, so that will also be supported by geospatial services, but that's above the surface. So there are many elements of business process there. In your view, do you see business process as a limiting term, or you see that as an expansive term where creativity has at full play, where service providers can take advantage of it for their own growth?
So I try not to get hung up on terms.
Yeah.
So we may not be using the term BPS in 5 years' time.
Right.
I can easily imagine that world. Some of us will. Michael, I'm sure you and I will. But if you think about the fundamental thing we're doing, right? Whether, a couple of observations. First of all, we're uncovering whole new estates which are changing rapidly, that need alliances and third parties. They need a lot of infusion of tech and a constant change of that tech and a change in state operations. And that requires a village, not a single organization, right? Even Google can't keep up with that, right? So, one of our clients, and they use a lot of third-party services. They didn't used to use any. Okay, so yes, I think fundamentally the thing that we call BPS is transforming into a whole exciting set of new services. That we may still have process-based BPS, but I think increasingly what's exciting is you've got these technologies and these new capabilities allow us to reconceive what we've been doing and do new things we didn't even conceive of. The whole issue of self-driving car, really a relatively new notion, right? I mean, we might have dreamed of it in science fiction, but we're now, we've got a whole industry, a whole service industry aligned against supporting that and training of that. Likewise, if you go over to, hey, let's just take something as simple as the Salesforce organization. Your Salesforce, anyone else's Salesforce. 15 years ago, we started putting in CRM. Today, that whole function has evolved. You now have chief revenue officers on operations management team. The way you cannot run a Salesforce now without changing it being intimate to the technology. So is that technology or is that an operations? Well, it's a Salesforce, right? Life sciences, they're trying to redeploy and really think critically about where they can deploy their Salesforce. That's a technology problem and an operations problem. So it's transforming traditional functions and it's opening up new ones. And what makes it remarkable is they're all on journeys. They're all changing very rapidly. And so the way we think, our traditional ideas of how we think about supporting that, which we really thought about build and use model, not a continually changing evolving model. And I think that's really exciting, and it should be really exciting for anyone in the service provider industry, because it really opens up huge new estates and allows us to transform existing ones.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel like a kid in a toy shop, because the kind of opportunities it opens up, it's super cool. And I mean, I do want to kind of go towards, without asking this, I don't think we should wrap up the flower side chat that we are having. You're a successful entrepreneur. You have reshaped your own company. You are at the edge when you are advising clients as to what are the changes. So if you look at all the CXOs around the world, and if there are 2-3 words of advice you wanted to offer to them, that how can they keep themselves current, relevant, and make decisions in the context of changes that they are making? What are the 2-3 advices that you would like to give to them at a personal level, based on your experience of having set this company which has changed and remained contextually relevant?
Well, I mean, the traditional answer is always be thirsty for knowledge, always be thirsty for data, right? And everyone says they're data-driven, right? Everyone wants to be data-driven. My experience is you're less data-driven, more conviction-driven. Decisions really come from conviction, your belief. So what you want to think about when you deciding issues is, what do I believe? And then how do I justify that belief? How do I prove that belief? That's where data comes in. So what I would say that, in this world in which we continue to ramp up the pace of change, right? Whether you have to change your company, I mean, our company's pivoted several times, or you have to shepherd your organization. How do you make those decisions? And I'd say, look, break it down into what you believe. What are your convictions, right? Then go find data to test those convictions. Typically, in any large organization, it's fine for you to believe something. You can make a decision, but you've got to move from personal conviction to institutional conviction. You've got to get your organization to come along with you, right? And that's where data helps. That's where rigor helps. You believe something, but these rascals don't, right? And they can be really passive-aggressive until they believe as well, right? So I think those are the things I would focus on, which is, yeah, you've got lots of decisions. You'll face a lot of challenges. Break it down to what you believe about it, test it, and then move from personal conviction to institutional conviction.
Thank you, Peter. I mean, while I asked you to give advice to many CXOs, I was taking mental notes, because I want to make sure that after 37 years, I don't become a piece of furniture in this industry. So
you're being too modest. I mean, you wouldn't end up here if you haven't been changing and driving a very successful organization.
No, I truly appreciate you taking time. More importantly, sharing your perspective in a very direct, authentic, and deep manner. And this is amazingly useful.
Well,
Look forward to continuing the partnership. Thank you, and let's keep in touch.
All right, thank you.